Hit Wicket is the cricket game backed by Harsha Bogle and me, so you know it's full of nerd energy. This strategic cricket game isn't just about frantic tapping. You make decisions based on how cricket actually works. You've got to set a batter up, right? And you can't hit a six from the first ball. Hit Wicket knows all that, and they made a game that makes it work with a few gaming twists in there as well. So play, build, and manage your team, because you are the batter, the bowler, the coach, the selector. I mean, you're basically everything in this game, right? And there's no ads on Hit Wicket. So download it for free for mobile and unleash your inner cricket legend. Welcome to Wagon Wheel, the cricket podcast where I, Jarrod Kimber, do I usually say I, Jarrod Kimber? I don't know. I like it. Answer your questions on cricket. Obviously, one of the best ways to do that is to support us on Patreon, which is patreon.com/ I can't remember if it's Jarrod Kimber or Good Areas now, but it's one of them. You'll work it out. But also you can send super chats in if you're watching a live on YouTube, which I think someone already has. They've lined them up before we've even started. So good place to start there. But let's go straight to the Patreons. And we've got Sriram, who says, why doesn't cricket have a statistics website where users can view data in the form of interactive charts and graphs? In cricket, most data is still presented in tabular form. With a lot of advancements and website design data and data analytics, cricket still seems to be lagging very much behind in this aspect. I don't think cricket has a proper stats website, Sriram. I'm not worried about the fact it's not visual. Why don't we have an advanced stats website that's really, really good? What's the one that's that's becoming good? Oh, God, I've forgotten the name of it. Cryptmetric, I suppose, has something. Cricinfo's putting more data on, which is nice, but still woefully inadequate of what they actually have behind the scenes. Yeah, look, there's not a lot of money in it. I remember there was this guy who was going to write this big article for the Cricketer, and he was saying that, you know, Cricinfo is going to put Stats Guru behind a paywall. And I remember at that time going to him, they're not, mate. And I'll tell you why they're not. It's because ESPN have gone out of their way to say no to every other paywall that's ever been offered about anything else. But also, I remember what the numbers were for Stats Guru. It's really small. Now, some of that is what you've talked about here, Sriram. If you go to Stats Guru and it's like this open page with like boxes and everything else, you kind of have to be one of us kind of people to care about it. And I think that's part of the issue. And I do think that's very fair. I know I use Intelligent Cricket stuff on occasion. And a lot of what they do is just so much more visual and just, you know, I know it's aimed at coaches. And because of that, they've made it a lot more visual. And it's a shame that, you know, theirs isn't a public system. Obviously, CricViz have made some more some visual stuff as well. But yeah, look, I think we need a proper advanced stats. So I think we need a couple of them, and I think they need to be fully funded. I actually do think if it was done correctly, it could make a lot of money and have quite a big impact. But it's you know, we're not quite there yet as a sport. But there's many things that we need to do, Sriram. I mean, the visual side of things that you're pointing out is fair, but I kind of just feel that let's just start with actually getting our stats right. Bloody says, who are the best ever number 3, number 4 batters against the new ball? Joe Root, especially pre-Baz ball when Burns and Sibley got out cheaply, is a good example. Yeah, well, this is a tough one because I don't know how you've really thought about this. But if you really dig down onto your question, like, because you put number 3s and number 4s in, and you think about sort of the history of the game, like Rahul Dravid and Ricky Ponting, let's just put those two there as, you know, probably the 2 high-scoring number 3s. Is that right? Am I missing a number 3 there? I can't even say my words at the moment. But if you look at those 2 guys as the 2 high-scoring number 3s, both of them could have opened. Viv Richards is probably another example of someone who could have opened. Like I think they had the skills that were available to them. I don't think you can really be a great number 3 and not be an opener. So Sangakkara might also be the other one with the most runs at number 3. But those sorts of guys are certainly the ones that when you look at it, they have all of those skills. So I think all of those players, like Bradman would have been a fine opener as well. I'm missing someone else that I really wanted to talk about, and I can't think of who that is. But yeah, I would say the vast majority of number 3s. The number 4 one's a little bit more interesting. I think Tendulkar certainly could have opened. I think Callis could have opened. Probably Lara is more suited to where he was. Trying trying to think of someone. Williamson could have opened, right? And Steve Smith is trying to prove that he can open at the moment. So, I think if you're batting at number 4, in general, you should be in around the 120 ball mark. Is that right? Or is it slightly lower because it's new ball? I think that's right. That's your median entry point anywhere. Is that your average entry point? I can't remember, whichever one it is. But there's going to be a lot of times you're going to be in within 40 balls, right? So if you're a number 4, you kind of have to have those skills. And if you're a great number 4, you probably do. William says, sorry if you've talked about this before, but I've noticed all the recent changes in your branding into good areas. What's your ambitions for the new network? Is it going to be like 99.94 but done slower or something different? I don't think it'll be like 99.94. I mean, this already existed. So a lot of these podcasts that we're doing now and the YouTube channel and everything else existed before 99.94. 99.94 was really a combination of everything I'd learned in the media of how to put together media that actually fit with how modern people consume it. I thought sports fans were often, hardcore sports fans were looked after and casual sports fans were looked after. But the big missing thing that I kept noticing was fans of just one team were just completely overlooked. So not so much at the international cricket team level, though sometimes at the international cricket team level, but the fact that there weren't daily podcasts on cricket in Pakistan, in India, by professionals who knew what they were talking about. And not that fans can't become those, because I was a fan who became one of those, but someone who can do it every day, who has the time and the energy and putting the effort in and all those sorts of things. So that's what 99.94 was supposed to be. And then not just making an article, but making a video and making it a short and making it a podcast, so that no matter how you consume the media, that information from that day, from that expert, was available to you. So good areas is but broadly based on a similar idea, which is what, which comes from the original thing. I mean, I got the idea a lot from the good areas stuff that we were doing, even if it wasn't called good areas at that point. And what we were trying to do really is create something where, on any particular day, you had the ability to come to the article, and there was the written article, or you go to the YouTube channel, or you go to the podcast, or there would be social shorts or whatever else there may be. So it's the same basic concept from that point of view, but it's not the same concept from a team point of view. I don't think the Good Area Network, as it is in a situation where it's going to cover every single major cricket nation, which is what 99.94 was trying to be. And not only that, 99.94 wanted to cover every single professional team. I don't know, again, if that's what I want to do directly with Good Areas, but that doesn't mean that wouldn't be, part of the overall thing. What I really want with Good Areas is, we've got the main channel up to 100,000. This channel's up to about 8 or 9,000. The aim was to get this one to about 25,000 and the other one to 100,000. Start to build them up. Try and get regular long-term advertisers. I don't think we're looking at investment yet, but investment is probably the next step. And what I really want to do with Good Areas is do something slightly different than 99.94, which is look at languages. And I really want, a Hindi channel, which will probably be aimed, more specifically at an Indian audience, an Urdu channel, which will be obviously more aimed at a Pakistani audience, and then, a Bangla one would be the next one that we might look at into the future, and doing it that way. So it's a very different kind of system than everyone else, but it will all come from the same thing. And the other thing that we had before is that everything was based on me, right? And we had, there was nothing wrong with the Red Inker name. It's a decent name. It's still the name of one of my podcasts, but it was like, Jarrod Kimber's Red Inker and Jarrod Kimber's Good Areas and everything else, which means that when other people come in, they're always interlopers. And that's not what I wanted. So many of the content that on the main channel now is a team effort, right? It is 1, 2, 3, or 4 different people involved. And that was always the plan. And then to have those same people, and then to have them on podcasts like Bayram and Estelle, and we'll be getting other people onto podcasts, into the future as well, is part of the plan of growing that out, and, having Varun and Cheyenne and CS and Estelle, with the writing and everything else. I don't just want it to be me. And it was never supposed to just be me. It was just that you know, I didn't have a lot of money to be able to hire other people. Now I have enough money to be able to hire those other people, to give them opportunities, to bring them in, train them up when they need to be trained up, and also develop them, right? Like, you know, someone like Cheyenne is an incredibly talented young person, but he was working for Sportskeeda or whoever it was before. There's no editing there. He gets a piece. I'm going to rip every piece that he does to shreds. Same with CS, like literally rip their pieces to shreds and start again. So it's very different, but I never wanted these channels to just be me. It was never the idea to do that. It was always part of something a little bit bigger. Now, maybe eventually what Good Areas becomes is like largely still centered around my personality, but there will be maybe other shows that people will come and watch that won't even involve me at all, and there will be fans that will like those shows more than anything that we do. That would be a massive success for me. But realistically, what Good Air is, the reason that we've gone away from calling everything individual things or having my name involved is because it's harder to get sponsors. Sponsors are much more interested in like the brand name. And when it came down to it, like we had like 4 different brand names and it was really hard to explain everything to everyone. Now a sponsor comes to me, I'm like, okay, this is what Good Areas do. This is where we put out our content. This is all the different people we have working for us. Where do you want to go from here? Now I've lost where I can hit the next question. Jessica says, Gideon Haig and Simon Hughes argue that Nasser Hussain's tenure as England Test captain laid the groundwork for Michael Vaughan rebuild. So dressing room culture, more professionalism, self-respect, discipline, etc. But when I've heard Nasser talk about it himself, he always makes self-deprecating jokes. Yeah, I think that's just who Nasser is. I interviewed him for my book. And I really wanted to talk to him because I knew he was a player who really thought about batting quite a lot and had a lot of theories and got the most out of himself, even if he wasn't a great player. And it was hard to get Nasser to just accept that and do that. I would say, and it's not like we're great friends or anything. I don't even know if we've ever had a drink, but we sat next to each other at Lord's in the press box for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. And I've certainly seen him around, a lot outside of the game and everything else. He comes across to me as very shy and very self-deprecating. I think that's just who he is as a person. The opposite of someone like KP, who will tell you about all of his achievements and explain to you, and that doesn't mean either of them are right or wrong. It's just who they are. I think if you go through kind of, Athers is the first one who really questions the way that English cricket is run, I think. Maybe not the first one who questions it, but the one who starts to change the conversation about like, wait a minute, I'm turning up and the manager's disappearing and the coach is disappearing and I'm running training. That doesn't make sense. That sort of thing. Then you have Bumble obviously come in who, has the energy and the brain, but maybe not, the entire system that he needed to be able to put it together. So they keep finding those, and then Nasser comes in and, but you talk to the players from that period, they knew they kind of felt that they were building towards something good. And Vaughan and Fletcher, I suppose, are the ones who benefit the most from that, more than anything else. But on top of all that, it also helps to have an all-rounder who can bowl, 90 miles an hour and a bunch of fast bowlers, right? Like, maybe the Athers and Hussain teams would have had more success if they'd had those options available to them as well. Will says, you often say that we don't see the best keepers at the top level and that the better batters are prioritised. So what level does this start happening? Under 16, under 18. Okay, so it actually starts happening. It actually starts happening in representative cricket. So it's not an age group thing. It's the first time teams are picked from a group, a collective. Generally what happens is the people who are picking them will go through the list of the guys who've made the most runs and the guys who've made the most wickets, and the women who've made the girls who've made the most runs and the girls who've making the most wickets. And then they pick their 15, so it could be as low as under 11s, I suppose, or under 12s, that sort of period. It's from there onwards, because it's the minute you start picking development squads and representative squads that it happens. And it's because those people can't, we're talking about amateurs quite often, they can't go out and look at all these different players, and so they just go and do that. And that's where it really comes from now. And so it starts there and it goes all the way up until you get to test level. And in your opinion, would it be beneficial to have the best possible wicketkeeper if they batted at 10 or 11, or a team's right to have a top 7 batters who are decent keepers? It depends on your side. This doesn't matter for Bangladesh, but you look at the Bangladesh team that's just beaten Pakistan, and you're like, well, they've got two genuine all-rounders in that side. They could have a specialist wicketkeeper if they wanted to. And then it depends on the wicketkeeper. Here's the issue I have. I think there are wicketkeepers in the world who are good enough at that job and with the right training and preparation and everything we now know about wicketkeeping that wasn't always available to everyone back in the day, that they could definitely be good enough to impact a game by batting at number 10 or 11. The problem is, are those wicketkeepers in professional cricket? And the answer is they are not. Michael Bates is the last one I saw in the West. I suppose you could say you've got the sort of, oh my God, I've forgotten his name. Riddiman Saha type keeper, and obviously Prasanna Jayawardene. But even they could bat a little bit, right? I mean, Riddiman Saha can bat. You know, there's no issue there. It's Michael Bates really can't bat, and Prasanna Jayawardene learnt to bat, but it took him a very long time. So it's actually hard to find what I would call wicketkeepers who can make an impact on winning just with their gloves, because those wicketkeepers aren't in the professional game to start with. So where would you be picking them from is my question. So if you say that you could have a wicketkeeper who's number 10 or 11, I think there are still people out there. Darren Berry is a perfect example of Darren Berry would allow you to have an extra 1.5 meters of the slips cordon covered because he was so good on his feet and such a good diver that you could move the slips cordon wider. Right? He literally had an impact on that, and then he could keep up the stumps to someone like Paul Rifle. Jack Russell, again, completely changes what your seamers can do by his ability to be up at the stumps. You know, wicket keepers who are, you know, weapons up at the stumps to spinners. You know, MS Dhoni not bringing his hands back, all these sorts of things. If you put all of those different skills I just put together, that wicket keeper could bat at number 11. But where are they going to get picked from? Right? They just don't exist. And I think that's the biggest issue at the moment. Anyway, let's take a quick break here on good areas, and we'll be back in a moment for more of this kind of thing. Always more of this. I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that, like how Pakistan lost a top batter after he was on the run from an angry husband of a movie star he was having an affair with, and also how one future captain of his nation realised he might have to go out and bat at Lords and that he didn't own his own pads. Cricket was used as a tool by the Empire, but what happens when those nations grow up and get good at it? Find Overthrowing Cricket's Empire on Amazon today. All right, welcome back. Jugal says, why did the ECB create a new franchise competition? Why didn't they just let the Blast be a solo domestic competition like the BBL and the Super Smash? What was lacking? Okay, so the Big Bash isn't a solo competition. So there was the Big Bash League, which was then turned, well, sorry, there was the Big Bash competition, which was turned into the Big Bash League, where the extra teams came in. There was a lot of thought that the archaic way that cricket did things, i.e. state, county, region-based, made it much harder with marketing, because actually, especially if you want people to come into the grounds, and this is, a very big thing in the way that most sports work, right? You want people to come in from that city area. For those games, especially for T20, where you're not going to come in from 3 or 4 hours away. So they wanted to be able to do that. So the Big Bash had done that. The thing with the Blast is, and I'm not anti-Blast, I love watching the Blast, I still watch it now. And it's become a culture war in cricket, the Blast. But the thing with the Blast is that the Blast had a glass ceiling that it was only ever going to make so much money from, right? Because of the kind of competition it was. So it was very good for the counties, and it worked very well on that level. But what they were actually trying to do is get a league that it has national attention, that can get, as you said, investors, but even before that, bigger sponsors, more TV time and everything else. And that is very hard to do with the way that the Blast was set up. So coming in with a new focused league where you can own every part of it and manage every part of it, And that's a big part of it as well, because the Blast is obviously, oh, Leicester want to do things this way, and this team wants it. The 100 was completely new. Everything could be managed. Everything could match. Color schemes could match. The names, all those sorts of things were very, very important. And so that really is what it comes to. The problem with the international model is that you make money from the ICC regularly, and then you make money bilaterally in patterns. So, we just had a test match in England the other day where not many people came to the 4th day of a test match. So England aren't going to make a lot of money from their international year. The reason that these leagues are so much more important is because of the consistent amount of earning that they can get year on year. And it really helps these boards. And that's why they're all going towards that kind of model. So when it comes to it, that's really what this is about. It's about trying to get that. And the Blast wasn't really giving lots of money to the ECB to be able to run the game, even if it was helping locals. That's essentially what it comes down to. Ian says, Gus Hackets had started to test cricket. It has been statistically ridiculous. That is correct. And he undoubtedly would drop off from here. But what have you seen? Is he a 10-year player? I really like him as a first change bowler. He still seems very, very limited to me at the moment. But it's repeatable what he does. And he's got good pace. Batters are constantly rushed by him and looking slightly awkward against him. That's a very, very good thing. And then if he can add a couple of skills onto that, I don't see why he can't be a fantastic bowler. Maybe the big difference is if he's a 10-year player, either he's probably going to have to be good enough to bowl with a new ball. No, sorry. If he's a 10-year player at first change, he'll probably have to bowl with the new ball and be a better bowler with the new ball than I think he is at the moment. He's going to have to get a little bit tighter with his best deliveries, and his groupings and everything else. But there's plenty to say that he has that. I don't know about his batting. I mean, I know he's made some runs so far, and good luck to him. But yeah, I'm not throwing his batting in. But from his bowling, I think it'd be really interesting to see him bowling on flat wickets away. Not that the England wickets have been particularly juicy, but to see him bowling on flat wickets away from the Duke's ball at first change. Once I could see him do that and get not similar kind of results, but good results, that's when I would say that's a 10-year player. But there are signs there that there are things that certainly they can work with. Jugal says, Jugal's all about the 100 here. ECB and Cricket Australia prioritise the 100 and the BBL lower than home bilaterals and tests because they currently make more money. Yes. Do you see this prioritization changing in the future with bilateral test revenue in these matches potentially declining compared to global T20 franchise revenue? Yes. I mean, they're going to prioritize whichever makes them the most money. And at the moment, it's international cricket. So it makes sense for them to do that. I think both of those leagues are a mile away from making... I haven't seen the numbers of the 100 recently, but I've seen the Big Bash numbers. They're not even close to international numbers, really, overall. I find it's going to take a long time. But yeah, I think whatever pays the most will be prioritized. I mean, county cricket used to be prioritized. And then Test cricket started to come in and make more money, and Test cricket got prioritized over county cricket. There's nothing new in those changes being made. Aditya says, has Root done enough to be called England's greatest test batter over Hobbs in your work in the 50 greatest test batters? No. Hobbs is a freak. I'll probably do an entire video on this, Aditya. In fact, I might even do it after this Wagon work because I don't think I can do it justice in this now. I think Root has the chance to overcome a couple of other England players that he's probably currently level with or just behind. So Herbert Sutcliffe would be a really interesting one for him. I can't see how he goes past Len Hutton or Hobbs based on what he has done at the moment. But I can see Hammond and Sutcliffe. So that's where he is right now. But the thing is, we don't know where he will be in 3 years' time. At the moment, you would still have Steve Smith ahead of him. And at one stage, Steve Smith was making a genuine claim to be the second best batter of all time. If Root has 3 or 4 more years like this, then we would be looking at something spectacular. But very few players have ever had years like this before. And Root does seem to go through periods where he makes a lot of runs and periods where he doesn't make as many runs. And so with that in mind, I think there's a big chance of him having another fallow period. And I don't mean a fallow period as in he's going to struggle, but he might only average 40 to 45 for a couple of years. And if he does that, then that will change his case. The problem with Hobbs specifically is just the amount of years as much as anything else. And how much better Hobbs was than everyone else in the first part of his career. Root's never had that kind of period. And Hutton is absolutely, and Hutton missed the best years of his career, had to come back after his arm injury and everything else. His numbers stack up so well when you look at his era and everything else that was going on at that stage. So I think those are really hard players to overcome. But I think Root certainly can go past Hutton. I don't see how he could go past Hobbs unless he does what Jimmy does, or plays until he's 42 or 43 at a level where he's regularly averaging over 50 still. Then you're talking about a Hobbs level career. Adityan says, how much power does the host nation have in deciding the schedule for ICC events? For instance, when India refused to travel to Pakistan, can Pakistan schedule India's games in Sri Lanka? No, I mean, generally, that's not really how it works. So you have the ICC basically form like a group that looks after those tournaments. So they're almost like separate companies, or I don't know what you call them, but like almost separate events companies outside of the ICC that will look after that, so that you'll have someone whose job it is to be the CEO of that World Cup. And there will be people from the local board that will be involved in that, but it's still very much run by the ICC. I don't think Pakistan would need to worry about anything like that. Like, it's just, as far as I'm aware, I can't imagine that they would be involved in something like that. Pakistan, generally when you host a World Cup, the thing that you're most interested in is where you are playing the games that you have scheduled. So you'd be looking at being very, very clear where you want to play all your round robin games, and then which semi-final that you want to play in. So there was a lot of people who were upset when India was getting flack for the World Cup semi-final thing for the last T20 World Cup. And they were like, oh, but, Australia picked their World Cup, and I can't remember whichever other country they were mentioning. But that was different because in the host, that's part of the reason you host, right? Is to do that. No one ever does that for the, just a random opposition team. So those are the things that the home boards are usually interested in. I can't imagine. And also, I know this is silly, but I don't see how it's in Pakistan's benefit to piss off Indian cricket. And there are some very good relationships there. I mean, while, the BJP has such a hold on the BCCI, I don't think anything's going to change massively. But I haven't heard too many situations of Pakistan like going, oh, we're going to one-up India here. That's just not how they work. Mostly, they're just trying to sticky tape their own organization together. Josh says, imagining you are captain coaching a team in a test match which allows unlimited substitutions. On your bench, you'll have every bowler who's ever lived. Without necessarily naming them, unless you want to, how many different bowling options would you use within an 80 over span? I mean, I suppose, Josh, that does depend a little bit on the conditions. You would want, McGrath, Marshall, with the new ball, I suppose. I'm just picking those two names out of the head, but as your genuine new ball bowlers, and I suppose while the new ball is still new, you would probably, or maybe you would have Marshall at first change actually, because you'd have Hadley at one end, and Hadley at one end, McGrath at the other, and then bring Marshall on very, very quickly if needed. Then you'd have Joel Garner probably as your second change from a seam option perspective. And then as for the other seamers, you would be looking at Wasim Akram or Waqar Younis in the middle overs, and probably someone like Neil Wagner, who's I mean, we don't have numbers going back, but probably one of the best old ball bowlers there's ever been. Certainly we know that in the last 20 years, no one really comes close to him. So you would probably get him, someone like him, or if there might be if I had all the information, there might be another older bowler who could have done a similar thing. But you'd be looking at those guys, and then spin. You would want Murali and Warne. You'll probably then want a traditional off spinner as well on your bench. Whether you would use them or not, I don't know, but you would have them on your bench. And then you would have the left arm finger spinner as well, in case you needed something slightly quicker than Warne. And so I'm expecting this team to already be all out playing against me, because Hadley, McGrath and Marshall have probably taken, 5-6 wickets. So I don't really need all those other options. But if that's how you would put it together, and then it would be, I think Garner and Warne would be a really, really good situation to bowl together. Akram and Murali would be a really, really good situation to bowl together, and that's kind of what you'd be looking at doing. But in ODI over spell, like if I can do it unlimited, then I'm making chops and changes all the time, right? Because like I'm just going to get another great bowler off the bench at any stage, and I can get really match-uppy if I want to. And if I know the opposition batting team really well, like I can literally pick the bowler that is going to have the biggest amount of problems. So I might use 9 bowlers, right? Probably left arm wrist spin is the only thing. I mean, you might have Kuldeep or Chuck Fleetwood Smith on the bench, but whether you even need to use either of them, I don't know. But as you would have I would have tall, I would have reverse swing, I would have short ball bowling in Neil Wagner. I've got seam bowling, I've got skiddy bowling, I've got swing bowling. I've kind of got everything I need in that lineup, and then it just depends how the game it plays out, Josh. I can't tell you how many I would use. As a captain, I was pretty proactive with bowling changes. I was a very wicket taking orientated captain, and I would cycle through my bowlers pretty violently. Outside of maybe 1 or 2 stock bowlers who I just didn't think anyone could hit, so I could attack at the other end through that. So yeah. That's how I would do it, but I don't think I don't know if that helps anyone. Let's take another quick break here on a Good Areas podcast, and we'll be back very soon with more of this. Sometimes you just need to take the slips out and bowl defensively. And you also need to be careful with your computer's defense as well. If you need a VPN, go Nord. NordVPN.com/Kimber to get a 2-year contract with a discount, plus 4 extra months and gifts in some markets. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. So put in some dot balls and turn them into maidens via NordVPN.com/Kimber. All right, welcome back. Jugal says, sorry if it's a stupid question, but I hear a lot of talk of saving Test cricket, which involves sharing ICC revenue. I don't think you hear anything about that, Jugal, unless I'm wrong, only because the ICC doesn't run Test cricket. So the ICC revenue has nothing to do with Test cricket. So unless you're hearing people mistakenly say that, it doesn't make any sense at all. If Test cricket has to be saved, shouldn't there be more emphasis on sharing revenue from England, Australia, and India, bilateral TV deals? Yeah, if it's going to be, let's say assume it's going to be run exactly the same way, which hopefully not, but if it's going to be run the exact same way, the best way of doing it, the simplest way right now would be to share the revenue so that when India plays England, England make 50% of that TV deal, and India make 50% of that TV deal, and then and then the same happens when England tour India, right? That would be the best way. That would instantly prop up all the cricket boards in the world. Everyone will make money from Test cricket, and it wouldn't really be an issue going forward. It still doesn't really overcome the massive problems of the fact that you still need England and India, and to a lesser extent Australia, to tour you a lot. So it still has other things. The thing that you're talking about is probably something slightly different. And what people are talking about, and I've certainly talked about quite a lot, is having a World Test Cricket League where you sell the rights as the ICC, and then that's all divvied up. That's the best way of doing it, because the secondary system, while it's just another band-aid on a bigger issue that really wouldn't help anything in the long term, but in the short term, I think it would be, it would still certainly work. Josh says, a couple of decades ago, Martin Crowe said, not many Maoris make good cricketers, for which he later apologised. I think he said, not many Maoris make good batters because they, well, because they don't have the patience for the game. And maybe he didn't say batters, maybe he did say cricketers. Since then, we've gone on to see Trent Boult, Shane Bond, Ben Stokes, Craig McMillan, Jesse Ryer, Carl Mills, and many others. Has Ben Stokes got Pacifica blood in him? I didn't know that. Brendan McCullum does as well, don't he? Both McCullum brothers, surprisingly enough. But yes, you don't have Ross Taylor in that either. And of course, Martin Crowe was I almost said Josh Ward's mentor then, was Ross Taylor's mentor. So it's so confusing, all this. But yes, he certainly talked about those sorts of things. So I just think that it was a white defined game if you go back in New Zealand history. And Martin Crowe, I can say this as someone who was his friend, and I don't mean this at all in a negative way, but I think he was desperate to be an intellectual. He was a very smart man, but I think he was desperate to be an intellectual. And I think sometimes when you're searching for stuff that you don't know as much about, you end up, and I think we've all been there, sometimes in conversations or anywhere else, you end up in situations that you shouldn't be in. And he was, eventually worked his way back from it. But I do think that if you go back to New Zealand cricket, it was quite a white-centric game for a long period of time. Anyway, you say, who have been some of the great modern Australian Indigenous players? Gillespie, Christian, Darcy Short, Scott Boland, Ash Gardner, Ash Barty. Do we count Ash Barty? She's a cricketer, obviously not a great in cricket. So yeah, there's not quite. It's not quite the same amount of numbers. When I say New Zealand cricket was a white-centric game, I think Australian cricket was actually set up to exclude Indigenous people. And I also think the conditions do play a small part, just because anyone I've known, whether they've been Indigenous or not, would just be like, playing cricket in Northern Territory or the top end of Queensland is not as easy as it is in other parts of Australia, just because of the temperatures and the conditions. So I've certainly heard people complain about that before. Mind you, it doesn't stop people running around playing rugby and Aussie rules football, although it's not, you don't have to do that for 4 days. So maybe there's an element of that there as well. But there was certainly a system within Australia that was actively trying to stop Indigenous players playing first-class cricket and then Test cricket as well. So that's why there haven't been as many come through. And I don't know if that was quite the case with New Zealand. I'm not an expert on that. As I said, some of those names that you mentioned before, I didn't even know had Pacific. They wouldn't all be Maori, of course. It would be Pacifica blood in some. Like Ross Taylor is not a Maori. I think I'm right in saying that. And then the second question is, do you think an annual cricket series between Maori and Indigenous teams would be a good idea? Look, I suppose it's up to them. I don't really know where it is in New Zealand cricket, because I know in Australian cricket that there is certainly an Indigenous team. Dan Christian captained them a couple of years ago. I think Scott Boland's brother played. Someone else's brother played. Did Brendan Doggett play in that one as well? So there is certainly an element of Cricket Australia really trying to push the Indigenous side of cricket, because they knew not only was it neglected, but as I said, actively stopped them from playing cricket for a very long time. It made it really hard for professionals, and there were some really good Indigenous players that we know should have represented Australia, and probably other players who did represent Australia who we didn't know had Indigenous blood in them. A bit like Scott Boland, who didn't know at that time. But I don't know if there's a Pacifica equivalent in New Zealand. So I don't know if there is a situation where players from over there represent that or not, because perhaps they haven't had the same kinds of issues, or there might be other reasons. Maybe because they're not all of one ethnic background, because from the Pacific Islands, there's so many different kinds of islands or everything else. It's a fascinating question, but I don't know enough about that side, Josh. Ali says, what is the best way to read pitches? Is it just experience, or is there a science to it? I think most people probably read pitches based on what has happened beforehand on those wickets. And then they look at the pitch and they try and put the two and two together. Oh, this pitch usually spins. It looks dusty. It's going to spin, right? This pitch is usually flat. It looks flat. It's going to be flat. So I don't know if that qualifies as a science or anything else. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know 100% if there is. What's the best way of putting it? I don't know 100% if there is a like a science to it. It is literally. So I wrote a piece about this. I think Ishiguro was one of the first women to do a proper pitch report. And I think there were some people who were quite upset that, that she had done it at the time. And I wrote a piece for Cricket Info saying it was great. Obviously, cricket was moving forward and she was a professional cricketer and she knows how to read a pitch and everything. But let's be honest, most people who read pitches, it's nonsense. It's just made up. And like a lot of ex-cricketers got really angry. But how many times have we seen a bunch of ex-cricketers tell us exactly what's going to happen on a wicket and it doesn't happen? Like, it's kind of subjective nonsense, right? So that's where we are. With that. Jessica says, oh God, this is small. Jessica says, in When Freddie Became Jesus, so was that my second book, I want to say? You discussed the wife theory in relation to Michael Clarke and Ricky Ponting. Theory is that young Australian men start their sporting careers full of recklessness and folly, and then they quite often fall or get dropped. Then they find a nice girl and settle down and make their comebacks, now with professionalism and responsibility. And the remainder of their careers are much more successful. Yeah, I think what I was talking about is something that had been passed to me as gospel, of this idea of that you needed, especially in Australian cricket, you needed a bit of a hard man or a wild man or a party man, and then they needed to settle down a little bit to become a slightly more professional. And that generally that happens through wife, family, kids, maybe captaincy, vice captaincy, all these sorts of things. I think now the way I would look at it is probably just that athletes become more professional around the age of 27, 28, and it probably comes out differently in Australia than it does in other places. And that kind of wife theory is kind of, it doesn't really matter if you're married at 28. Like a perfect example, I could be wrong, but I don't think Chris Rogers got married. Like, I know he has kids now. Like, I think Chris Rogers' maturity happened before he was married with children, right? But it happens probably around the same age, around that 28, 29 period. So, and Chris Rogers, even into his 30s, was known as someone who, liked to drink and a dance and, and to have a little bit of fun. So, completely the opposite of his on-field persona, probably. But off-field, that's kind of how he was known. And so that's just a maturity thing, right? And Gareth Batty, I don't know when Gareth Batty got married either, but Gareth Batty sort of told me that he got to 30, 31 and was like, oh my God, I haven't really achieved anything that I could have with my career because I haven't tried to professionalize. And the second half of his career, he was incredibly professional. So I think probably looking back, that's what they are talking about in that sort of wife theory. But it's also, I think, just younger people are, more prone to taking risks and not worrying about the future and everything else. And as you get to 27, 28, that's real middle age for a professional athlete, right? Like if you get to 28, there is a possibility by 32 or 33, you're already past your peak, right? You might even be out of the professional game at that point. Like it's a real issue, I think. And so a lot of athletes do start to work it out at that point. And a lot of athletes don't, and they just flame out. Right? They don't ever make it. They don't handle that level of professionalism. Ben says, probably best to ask this. Oh, wait. Why can't I see any of the text today? Ben says, probably best to ask this while there isn't any man-cat controversy so people can be more objective. Why does the ball need to be dead in between deliveries at all? At the start of every over, the umpire should say play or over until the umpire say over at the end. The ball should be live the entire time. So I don't know, Ben, if you've ever played indoor cricket, but indoor cricket plays that. It's fun, but it's kind of a very different sport. The emphasis then is on sort of trickery and skullduggery and everything else. And don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed that in indoor cricket, but I don't know if over 450 overs, we really want people stealing runs in between with bowlers throwing the ball to each other and everything else. Like every time someone throws the ball to the bowler, it goes over their head and people take a run. I don't know if that's enjoyable. Now I get it. I understand your general principle. You're saying, why did we decide that the ball is dead. But I think we're trying to say that that cricket is a game of individual contests and close contests. And I think that's because it goes for so long. Now, T20 cricket, your theory is much more interesting, I think. And will we ever see that? I don't know. We might see some leagues try versions of this again, but I don't think it works specifically very well for very long games of cricket, just because it's just going to be on edge. I just think it would be frustrating to watch. And I say that as someone who's watched a lot of indoor cricket. And if you watch 2 or 3 games in a row, to a certain point, it's, when you see overthrows, and even if it's for your team, there's something about overthrows that are like sapping, because the play was supposed to be over and it's still going. And you watch indoor cricket and these things happen again and again, especially sort of mid-tier indoor cricket. I don't know. It's not for me, Ben. Simon Nathan says, where does this defeat to Bangladesh leave Pakistan cricket, since the PCB is known for their knee-jerk reactions at the best of times? I mean, we don't know where Pakistan cricket is, mate. I mean, that's the best point. I don't know where they are. I hope it makes them double down on the fact that the structure needs to be fixed, not individuals. My guess is individuals will be blamed. Probably Shan Masood, or hopefully not Jason Gillespie, but someone like Shan Masood could be blamed for this. But I think it's about structures, and that's where they should be thinking. Will says, who do you think would win a test between the top 11 run scorers and the top 11 wicket takers? Top 11 wicket takers, that's easy. Swami Nathan says, Rob on his pod got a basic fact wrong about Jay Shah by mixing up the Why, the TV show, and the publication. I'll get back to that. Estelle and Ravi Ashwin. I was trying to work out, did Estelle have a podcast with Ravi Ashwin? Estelle and Ravi Ashwin, or Ashwin, on their pods got basic facts about Dhawan's career wrong. Are there just too many cricket pods? Like there are, is there too much cricket? The people aren't able to sufficiently prepare for their shows. I'm pretty sure Rob was making a joke, because he probably was getting as much information about Jay Shah as he could, saw that the Why, the TV show, a joke, and put them out there. He's got a very dry sense of humor. I find it hard to believe that he didn't get that wrong. Basic facts wrong about Darwin. Here's the thing about podcasts. So I mean, Nathan, if you want people to read out facts to you that are always right, you would never want to listen to the podcast. I'm not saying podcasters shouldn't strive for facts. Sometimes you misread your notes. There was one recently, someone got really upset with me when I was saying how many balls, I think it's how many balls, Courtney Walsh had bowled compared to Jimmy Anderson in first class cricket. And I'd just gone to Stats Guru. I was live on the podcast, gone up, looked at it, and obviously just looked at the wrong thing and read out the wrong number. Didn't really change the point of what I was saying. I think Courtney Walsh had still bowled a lot more first class deliveries than Jimmy Anderson. But this person was like, I can't believe you did that. I'm like, well, I'm live on air. Like, I'm looking at something. I'm thinking about what I'm saying next. And I'm trying to read something. I'm trying to find the website. I'm trying to find the right area and everything else. I'm trying to remember the details, why I'm bringing it up in the first place. That's what podcasting is. That's what broadcasting is in general. Listen to commentators. They make mistakes all the time. I don't think you want a situation where people are just reading out facts to you. And if you do, I'm sure you can find a cricket podcast that does that. But no, I don't think that's just normal. Not to mention everything we've just said then, there can also just be like, I'm pretty sure you just got it wrong with Rob and he just wanted to make a wire joke. He probably read a fact about, well, I know he did. He read a fact about Jay Shah and the Wire, and he was like, I'm going to make a wire joke because he probably wanted to make a string of bell joke or something. And so sometimes you don't realize what that person is actually saying and you're taking it on a different level. And then the other one is just misspeaking. Like the amount of times, like especially when I'm doing the hard data stuff occasionally, it's like, I've got a script in front of me and I will record something and Sean will say afterwards, I think you said that wrong because you actually said there was no chance of this, but actually the data says there's every chance of this. Just a normal thing when speaking. I mean, the great thing about podcasts is they are conversations, right? And commentary, again, is a conversation. Don't think you can live fact check conversations. And I know it's hard in this world because everything is cut down to shorts and, things are taken out of context. And I've got people who I've said one thing, even correct things, but they've misinterpreted them. There was one recently where I got this really angry email from this group of fans who are Rohit Sharma fans about me saying that Rohit Sharma wasn't in the top 10 of ODI batters. And I haven't gone back to listen to it, but I think what I said was, I think the question was, is he in the top 2 test batters, top 2 ODI batters of all time? Or, does he have a case for number 1? And I was like, well, no, because his numbers are certainly below, Viv Richards, who had a similar record to Rohit Sharma throughout his career. I think Rohit's pulled away from him a little bit recently. But it's like, well, you can't compare the two of them because Viv Richards was averaging more and striking way more than anyone else in his era, and Rohit Sharma wasn't. And so I don't think he had him. I think it was him and Warner. They didn't have a genuine case to be like the number 1 or the top 3 or whatever the number was. I said you'd probably be looking at more as top 10, and I haven't looked at the top 10, so I don't even know if either of them are in the top 10. That's what I said. What was heard was Rohit Sharma is not in the top 10 ODI batters, and you get that a lot. People don't listen to the full part of it. I mean, there was a guy who used to go through and fact check a lot of my videos on YouTube, and I would go in and re-fact check his fact checking. I'd be like, if you listen to what I just said, that wasn't what it was. And people hear what they want all the time. So you can't worry about that as a broadcaster. You just have to broadcast. Will says, has this been the worst domestic summer for English international cricket since you moved to England? I don't know. I haven't really followed it that closely, if we're being honest. So I'm not invested in it enough to maybe make that call, Will. You would have to go through all... I've just watched so much cricket in England. I'm sure I've seen some pretty ordinary summers before. Maybe this is the worst one. I can't remember who else played in the Tino Best summer when he made his runs. That one would I don't remember that being a brilliant year. But maybe I'm wrong. Roll says, why does nobody in Australia seem to like Michael Clarke? How do you read his captaincy? Michael Clarke was desperate from a very young age to be very famous and be great at cricket. And he made a lot of decisions that were around him never wanting to be dropped from the Australian cricket team, for him to be seen as a legend. And I think the Australian public sort of took that as, you don't want to do that. You don't actually want to go out and just make the runs and let us decide. You're framing it. And I think he's very image conscious and very brand conscious. And I say this as someone who's met him and once danced with him in a nightclub. And the dance that we were doing in the nightclub was about his bat sponsor, because a journalist had asked about his bat sponsor. I think it was a Spartan, I think. And he was so excited that he came over to see the journalist in the nightclub. And then I started the dance going, Spartan, or whatever it was. And he started doing it. He's just very brand conscious and everything else. He's also, I think, if you look at him and Shane Warne, they both wanted to have sex with very pretty women and famous women and have fancy cars and everything else. But Michael Clarke did it in a really polished, smooth way that grated on the Australian public, whereas Warney did it in such a stupid way that people just kind of, even if they cringed at some of the stuff he did, they kind of went, well, that's Warney. And I think there's an element of that with Clarke. There was cricket reasons too. Like, I think a lot of people would have said for a long period in his career that he rode a pretty good cushion behind, much better batters and didn't have to do the hard work. And when the hard work was needed, he didn't always stand up. As a captain, he was very good strategically, but not always particularly good with man management. There was lots of issues with him and man management. So usually if you're really good strategically, everyone talks you up, but because of the other side. But he was desperately unpopular as a person. I think he's the only Australian captain I've seen booed at his home ground. I don't know if he was captain at that stage, but as you know what I mean, I can't think of another player of that level in Australia that I've ever seen booed at their home ground. He was booed at the MCG more violently, but that makes more sense. I think he might have been booed in Adelaide as well. Every time he tried to sort of control something, it kind of backfired on him and didn't go the way that he wanted. And I actually think he was quite mistreated for many different reasons. I'm not sure Michael Clarke, though, he's really conscious of his brand. I don't know And I know people who've played with him since he was, what, 7 or 8 years old. And they would say they don't really know what he stands for in life. And I think that comes across a little bit. Whereas, with other people, we kind of know who they are. He's so stage managed that it didn't always come across. And when he tried to be the everyman, it went worse because he didn't have that within him. And as I said, I think some of that is, that's who he was. And that wasn't always accepted. I've done a whole podcast on it years ago. I find him one of the more fascinating people in Australian cricket history because of that. I don't think he deserved the flack that he got. But yeah, he's certainly someone who I probably think more about him than I do Mark Taylor, who, was maybe a more successful, more important captain for Australia in many ways, right? There's something about Michael Clarke that I really wanted. I don't think Michael Clarke's famous enough, if we're being honest. But I really wanted to do a proper book on Michael Clarke's place within the Australian culture. It's gone now. That moment's completely gone. And I think also a really, really honest book with Michael Clarke would have been fascinating. But he was never going to allow someone like me to write his book. I didn't even bother trying. It just would never have happened. Will says, so Bumble seems to be picking up the anti-Azine cause again, retweeting people who are attacking what Lord Patel did in Yorkshire. Given your more liberal politics, how do you handle such differences of opinions with colleagues? Look, especially in this case where he's also attacking someone in Dobell who you've worked with in the past. I hadn't seen all this, by the way, so I wasn't aware of this, but I'm not really on social media all that much anymore. I assume most times in cricket, I'm going to be the most left-wing person in the room. Not 100% of the time. I'm sure there are more left-wing people than me out there. But the vast majority of any situation I'm going to be in cricket, I'm going to be hard left compared to everyone else, right? Far left, even, compared to most other people. Certainly in English cricket. Australian cricket, maybe not quite as much. New Zealand cricket, Indian cricket, there are, I would say again, so South African cricket, definitely. So there's a lot of world cricket where I would be the most left-leaning person in any room. It's a weird situation to be in. I don't know if I'll ever write about it. I don't know if it doesn't affect me the same way it did when I was coming up. I think when you have to prove yourself as a person in the industry, and then you've got someone saying something that is just nonsense or factually incorrect, or you probably get into a lot more debates where you're trying to win them over. No, you don't understand. The thing with the trans issue is, and then they say something that is just blatantly false. Of, I don't know, left-wing people are trying to put microchips into straight children's head to make them trans or something. Yeah. So I think at a certain point you kind of just move on from it emotionally, the same way that anyone. But I look at it in a different sort of way than most people, which is, I think I'm at my best when I'm a little bit of an outsider. I like coming at things from different styles and different places. And so to be that person, to me, I think actually helps what I do and everything else. And so I'm never going to feel at home 100% in cricket. I'm not, because I'm never going to be able to have the kind of conversations I want to have within cricket, with the kind of people I want to be in cricket, because cricket is such a conservative game and so many conservative people are drawn to the game, right? So I don't know if this is still the case, but like I've been followed online, on my social media platforms by many politicians who almost everything they vote for is against what I believe, right? Like it's just part of the package of the sport. And so that's where I am, with those sorts of things. I don't think there's another way for me to be able to handle it. Like at this point, you would have all your conversation. And the thing is, they're disingenuous conversations because most of these people are not politically active. They don't sit down and study this. So the conversations would be pointless anyway. But, what I would say is this, when it comes down, when it comes down to it, I think Azim Rafiq was incredibly brave for coming forward. And I think English cricket needed someone to come forward. And as my wife quite often says, the perfect person to come forward doesn't exist. It's just that person. And Azim Rafiq has clearly made mistakes in his past. He's not a perfect person, but he's come forward and tried to say some things. And George Dobell is someone who has found an issue that really matters to him and is trying to come up with it. Me and Bumble have had disagreements in private and probably on air about Dobell before, right? And probably about Azim before. Us having two different views on something doesn't mean that we can't work together. And if that was the case, no one would ever work with anyone. I've never met another person with the same political beliefs that I have. It's just, and I think as you get older, you realize that more and more. Everyone disagrees with everyone. Ben says, how does commentary rights work? Obviously, ball by ball is protected and sold as rights. So ball by ball is not protected. Anyone can do ball by ball. There are some countries that make it harder. My memory was that India, it's a little bit harder to do ball by ball without buying the rights. But in the vast majority of the world, you can do ball by ball commentary legally from home. What is protected is, and it's basically threefold. You obviously don't get access to the ground. So the first part of that is that you don't get access to interviews, you don't get access to all, social media stuff now, all the other things that matter a lot. More importantly, you don't get access to the sound, right? And the sound is very, very key because that was the big problem with Test Match Sofa. You're listening to Test Match Sofa and it sounded very static. And so what Test Match Sofa did is, that's why the jingles came about, that's why talking over each other and, having all that sort of stuff mattered. So the sound is a very huge thing. The third thing is that anyone can commentate from home, but as you go up and you need financing, these things aren't cheap, right? I could do watch-alongs every single day from home if I could pay for a couple of people to do it. This channel we would have heaps of watch-alongs on. The reason we don't have watch-alongs on this channel is that I can't afford it, right? And it then comes down to sponsors. Most people who sponsor cricket want to also sponsor a home team or a home broadcaster or whatever that may be. So what Test Match Sofa found was their big challenge was getting a sponsor who was willing to invest a lot of money in cricket, but not in something that was accepted by the cricket establishment. So making money off commentary at home is very different. Watch-alongs, realistically, there is no one who can stop you doing a watch-along on anything. But watch-alongs are in cricket not particularly common or famous. There's a few really good channels out there, kids doing it in Hindi and Urdu and stuff, but it's still not as mainstream. It's certainly not mainstream, right? And so you're in a situation where I actually tried to get some sponsorship for another channel who were doing really, really well. And I said to my sponsor, look, this is what we do. And they were like, oh, we don't want to sponsor watch-alongs. So it's, again, hard to make money. So you're talking about a time investment and everything else. But there isn't really anyone who can stop you commentating. But there's a sort of, it's probably easier to do watch-alongs. Get yourself in, BBC now does watch-alongs, right? So they were the ones that the most anti-Test Match so far. They can't really complain about watch-alongs if they're doing them themselves. And they were the most anti about, these commentary services in general. Watch-alongs are now at a point where I think people will be able to start monetizing them properly and be able to do them. But the only channel I know that was shut down for rights issues, and I'm not 100% sure, but there was, when Test Match Sofa existed and White Line Radio existed in Australia, there was an Indian IPL version and it shut down. And I heard rumors that there was a lawsuit pending, or at least legal action was being taken. And that affected those guys, which is why I say that's the only place I'm aware of where there may be some level of law. But in England, if guerrilla cricket is still going, it's completely legal. It's legal right in different parts of the world. It's not legal in America, is my memory. Because I know, only because I remember Bill Simmons talking about it on a podcast once. So I think I'm right in saying that. But there are very few countries that have actual laws about this. So when you say where the line is, there is no line that is done. But I think it's actually, if you're going to do it, and I say this as someone who is 99.94, that was part of our business model, was going to be commentary. And we've also, with Cricket 8, we do watch-alongs. So I'm very in this sort of space professionally. It's actually much easier to do a watch-along from the point of view of it's kind of commentating on a ball is a lot more energy sapping, whereas keeping conversations going isn't as energy sapping. So it's easier to do a watch-along from your staff perspective. And then also it just sounds more legal than saying we're doing a legal commentary without the rights, right? So when you go to advertise, no, we do watch-alongs. Yeah, there's nothing below board here. We just do watch-alongs. Oh, wrong one. WG Disgrace says, what happened to Yasir Shah? He went from one of the best red ball bowlers ever to not even starting for Pakistan. It's a very good question. I don't know if I have a great answer to this. It's something I might want to go back and have a look at one day, but it's not something that I've looked at that much specifically at the moment. But I do think there is. I think there must have been a technical change. My guess is it could be a finger or a wrist. Shouldn't be an elbow for a wrist spinner, should it? Maybe a shoulder. Maybe one of those just didn't work as well. It'd be interesting to talk to him about it. I mean, that's where I really like to start the conversation of just saying to Yasir Shah, take me through it. How did this happen? Why did this happen? And go from there. But yeah, certainly there's no doubt that something changed with him as a player. And then from there, you have this incredible drop off of performance. And it's so stark, as you said. I think a lot of it was also he was just such a brilliantly devised bowler for UAE conditions. And so away, he obviously wasn't that level of a threat. So I do think there were little things that came from that. But overall, I do think it's one of the more interesting ones. I think it's one. I don't think it's very rare to see a bowler continue to be able to bowl, but no longer be at that level effective. I wonder, is Tim Brosnan a good example of this? We see it in seamers maybe more than we see it in spinners. But when it comes down to it, I suppose it can happen to either. All right, there's a couple of chats and super chat, and all sorts of things coming up in the group. Don't know why Simon Nathan came up here. But yeah, there's a couple more questions that I can get to. So I'll have a quick ad here, and then we'll be back in a moment for more of the Wagon Wheel. This is brought to you by Cricket 8. They are a new player in the game trying to educate fans on what is really happening in cricket. We have a partnership with them where we host live watch-alongs, do podcasts, and write articles. If you want to know what is really happening with our game, visit cricket8.com. If you make any content, Minvo Pro is the tool for you. Take your long format content and cut it and slice it for social media. This AI-inspired weapon will turn your one piece of work into so many clips. Try Minvo.pro now. All right. Welcome back. Okay. Here we go. Arco said, how do we realistically compare players with excellent home record but poor away record? Warner, Williamson, Mahela versus players not as exceptional but good all around the globe. I think when it comes down to it, it's much easier to find a player who can score runs at home in any situation. So I personally look at them very high. So all those guys I have marked down. Dennis Compton, I think, is another one. Everton Weeks is another one. There's a lot of players with very good overall numbers that don't have the same level of away. And I don't think that means that they're not great players. But I would rather have someone who can average 47 at home and 47 away, because that's a banker when I travel, than I would have someone average 60 at home and 35 away. Right? Like, it just... To me, it doesn't make any sense to do that. So even if that other person's average might be 47, 48, 49, right? I don't want the extra couple of runs don't mean as much to me in that situation. It's so hard to find batters who can make runs or bowlers who can take wickets away from home. So I always factor that in. It's something that for me is a really, really important part of it. Ben said, an agent asks you for a player and you said, look at Kyle Jamieson. Yeah, I should have made money off that, shouldn't I? If an agent asks you today to look for a player, who would you suggest? So at that stage, I was doing a lot more analysis. And so I was kind of deep into those sorts of players and looking for them. I don't do as much of that at the moment, Ben. So I haven't seen anyone pop up. Running good areas and also, running the content at Cricket 8 and these sorts of things. That's my main job at the moment. So back in the Kyle Jamieson's day or the Benny Howe days or, any of the sort of random players that came along in my system, what I was really looking for was anomalies. Like, why does this player have this kind of record? And then can I match it up with video or a narrative or anything else? And that was a big thing at that stage. And so I don't do that as much anymore, Ben. But if I come up with one, I'll probably say it on the podcast. Stag says, is it overlooked that Sachin at number 4 ended up number 1 run scorer batting alongside Dravid at number 3, who became number 3 run scorer? Much the same with Cook. It's the only thing that stops Root. Is a competent top order. Yeah, so there was a fascinating conversation I had with a bunch of people the other day. Me and Bumble did a podcast on TalkSport where we had to pick between Lara and Tendulkar, and he picked Lara and I picked Tendulkar. Despite picking Tendulkar fans got very upset when I said that Lara was more talented, which Tendulkar's teammates have told me before. Like, that they don't see that as a slight on Sachin. They see that as a plus because that meant that Sachin made everything out of his talent in a way that Lara did not. But these people did not see it that way. But one of the things they were trying to compare was, like, they were saying that Sachin didn't have a great batting lineup to go up against. And I was having this conversation in good faith until they got a bit weird and pissy, and I left them all alone. But if you look at that conversation, it's really interesting because they were saying that that Tendulkar had a similar kind of batting lineup to Lara. It was actually, in Lara's case, no one that he batted with ever averaged more than 45 in the test that they played with him, with more than 1,000 runs, and only 2 players averaged over 40 in the test with Lara. I think Hooper might have just been over 40. And Shivnarine Chanderpaul was like 43, 44. And made most of his runs after Lara. Bit of a shame for West Indies cricket. They didn't quite have either of them at their prime at the same time. And it meant that Lara he had no great openers, and so he had no real support. And so he was constantly put into this situation. How do you back that up with the fact that one of the world's great number 3s is batting ahead of you in Tendulkar's case? And it's the same conversation. The most extreme version of this is not the Sachin or the Cook one, it's the Gilchrist one. How good was Gilchrist really when most number 7s will never ever come in with that many runs on the board, right? Like, that's not saying Gilchrist wasn't great and that Root isn't great and that isn't great. It's just a completely different situation. I looked up Andy Flower. God, who was it compared to? Andy Flower compared to Steve Waugh. And there was someone else. Might have been Alan Border. Maybe Clive Lloyd. I can't remember. But we looked him up, and it was like he came in at a similar amount of time when it came to balls, I think. I think I'm remembering this right. His median entry point was quite similar in terms of balls. But if you remember the old Zimbabwean batting lineups, his brother, Alistair Campbell, all these sorts of guys, none of them hit the ball off the square. So they all scored incredibly slow. And so when he would come in at number 5, the average score would be 70 or 80. Whereas when Steve Waugh came in, even if it was the same period, the average score would be like 120. And I'm making those numbers up, but it's something like that. The pressure at coming in with I said average score, I think I meant median. Pressure of coming in with a median score of 80 compared to 120 every single time. Again, that's not saying Steve Waugh isn't a great player, but it means that some players, just through the position that they're in, have to bat under incredible pressure all the way through. And I don't know why this is now about Andy Flower, but I remember Jimmy Adams saying specifically, you don't know what it's like to be the only guy on your team who's gonna make runs. And I remember looking at, John Reid. So the old John Reid for New Zealand, and his numbers don't pop, but John Reid probably would have been a great number 5, probably number 6. I think the way he played, hard hitting sort of player, would have come in, dominated the old ball. John Reid had to bat at number 4, right? And New Zealand never had any openers who could hit the ball off, so he was in really early on. Even when he was batting at number 5, he was coming in. I think it does affect you, and it's why really I think the best way of looking at it is probably and this is something that we're kind of working towards as a group at Good Air, is coming up with a metric of what was the score when you came in, right? What was the most likely score for you to have made from that position based on all the other number 4s, number 5s, or number 6s? I still think Sachin and Root are going to come out really high. But there is a truth that it's much easier to do that. You know, Ponting's great years were overlapped with Langer and Hayden, right? Like, these things do matter. It means they're not in as early, as regularly as they should be. So I think it's a fascinating one. Thanks for bringing it up, Stags. Ekant says, and thank you for the super chat, Ekant. Why are tests called tests? Are there any reason other than it test players? I don't even know if that is the original reason. I think, I mean, rugby calls it that as well, right? So it's not just cricket, although I'm pretty sure the origin is cricket. All I know is that the name test was used well before the first test match, and it was quite a common phrase. And it's really interesting. I think it was just a way of distinguishing it from normal match. So I don't know the etymology of that. Might be one from Abhishek Mukherjee. I've never looked it up before. But my guess is it was just, there was a way of just changing it so it is slightly different. Ekant again. Yeah, thank you again. Which game, international or domestic, have you watched the most number of times, be it for entertainment, work, or something else? Well, I think there's the ones, especially, you know, as someone who's lived in Australia and England, like Foxtel and Sky have their games that they just put on all the time. Like the Nasser, is it Nasser and Thorpe in Pakistan batting in the dark? I just feel like I've seen that so many times. The Dutch beating England at Lords is probably the game I've seen the most times, because that gets shown a lot on Sky, but also I had the full copy of that. Well, the Facebook used to have it up so I could watch the full game of it. Plus, I've written quite a bit about that game. I've written about the Stuart Broad angle, and I've written about the Dutch angle. So I've really watched that a lot. I reckon that would be close to the one I've watched the most. I suppose 99 World Cup semi-final would be another one. There's the Michael Bevan game where he, you know, hits the winning runs at the end off the last ball. I feel like those are the ones off the top of my head. I've seen the Laxman-Dravid partnership a lot. Just to watch Langer Bowl, mostly. Yeah, I feel like that's one I've seen a lot. Australia, Kenya in the 2003 World Cup. I've certainly seen the Asif Karim spell. But yeah, it's hard because when you say games, you very rarely watch games. You watch individual bits, right? So domestically, the game I probably watched the most is Sean Tate taking 7 for 36 or whatever it was against New South Wales, which I've written a big piece about years ago, and I watched that hundreds of times. Thanks to Laurie Colliver, I think, who got me that footage. Cricket in India says, what kind of pitches should be prepared by Pakistan against England? Test to take home the advantage. I mean, what's their advantage at the moment as a team over England? Like, what do they do better than England? Is it bowling spin? Maybe? Is that it? I mean, I don't know what the pitch is for that, man. Good luck. It'd be really funny if I got a job at the PCB now and I had to work that out. Sonhel says, I feel KRL's decline happened since he was paid 17 crore salary from the IPL. Do you feel money has impacted Indian talent in a negative way? Shikhar Dhawan's the one that I have seen, that I saw the money. I haven't seen that many cricketers. It's a big thing in American sport that you get the bag and then you sort of pull back a little bit. Shikhar Dhawan definitely did. And I'm not saying he did it because he got paid, but there was a definite regression after he got big money. I don't think that's the case for KRL. He still continued to make a lot of runs. So no, I don't think specifically. Do I feel money has impacted Indian talent? Look, it's probably meant that other things are more important than just performing for India anymore. But I still think the more games you win for India, or the more runs you make for India, or the more impact you have for India, the more money you're going to make as a cricketer anyway, outside of that. So I can't see, it's not like American sports where, like, I don't know, you're in fucking Indiana, right? And you're really good at basketball or baseball or whatever. Probably basketball in Indiana, right? Like, the amount of sponsorship is probably always going to be capped. So whatever you get on your contract is probably going to be a maximum, right? And that would be the case with footballers around the world too. That's not the case if you're an Indian cricketer. The better you are for India, the more sponsorship that you're going to get. And you could double your salary through endorsement deals, right? Triple, quadruple in some cases. So I don't really see this as an issue at all. Harry says, with Glenn Phillips able to do everything from bowling to batting to keeping, can he become a good captain? I think he's obsessed with cricket and he's very detailed oriented. He obviously has his own issues with, I think he's talked about this before with his ADHD and everything. Not to say that you can not captain with ADHD, but, understanding, and I don't know exactly how his ADHD manifests or how that works for him. But I think it would be harder for him than maybe someone else. That doesn't mean he can't do it. I'm sure we've had many ADHD and autistic captains before and who've been successful at it. But I would say that, that would be the unknown for me. Would he be dedicated to it? Would he throw everything into it? Is he obsessed with cricket? Quite clearly, yes. Shrinav says, I've always had this question. What difference in skill does a non-new ball bowler have in comparison to a new ball bowler? So essentially, a new ball moves, right? Quite naturally. I could run in with a new ball now in my hand and get it to swing away, right? So it is not particularly hard to find a bowler who can keep their wrist still, bowl at a pretty decent clip, and move the ball around, right? What a non-new ball bowler has to have is a next skill when the ball stops moving, right? Whether it be the ability to move the ball more, like, great reverse swing bowlers, whether it be the ability to bowl faster when you need to bowl faster, whether it be cutters, whether it be height, whatever it may be, you need to have another skill that keeps you in the game. So, the best new ball bowlers, the best first change bowlers in history, Neil Wagner, Morne Morkel, Joel Garner, right? You're talking about two blokes who were tall as hell and both pretty fast. And then you've got a left arm bowler who came up with a unique method of giving batters problems. So that's what great first change bowlers generally have the ability to do. And then you look at someone like Pat Cummins, who, because of his technical skill and his pace and everything else, but because of his technical skill, he has the ability to get little bits of movement at high pace for longer periods of time than a new ball bowler who can only move it when the ball or pitch or the conditions are in their favor. Amit says, Kuldeep after his comeback has significantly increased his speed while maintaining high reps. What sort of adjustments are needed to do that? And that's completely technical. So I would assume, and I would have to go back and have a look at it, but most left arm wrist spinners are not technically correct because they collapse at the crease because they're used to bowling to right-handers. So I would assume what happened was they've made him a little bit stronger. So in his core, maybe his front arm is a little bit stronger, but that. So I now bowl faster and spin the ball more now at the age of 44 with a bung elbow or bung arm than I did when I was 25 and 26. And the difference is that I now understand biomechanics. And so I understand that the best way to get the ball to spin, everyone said, give it a rip. And I would be trying to rip it as hard as possible. And I'd get little revs. And then if I bowled quicker, the revs would just disappear. Whereas now I realize that actually giving it a rip doesn't mean anything. It's a stupid thing to say, really. When I'm at my best is when I'm side on and my full body rotates. And when I do that and I put side spin on the ball, I can side spin it at pace. When you're younger, you don't really have to worry about that, especially if you're a left arm wrist spinner and you're already got a huge advantage over everyone else. I would say what they did was they made him a little bit more direct with his run up. And I'm trying to remember off the top of my head because I know there are some changes. I think he's stronger in his core. He's getting through the crease at a better velocity than he did before. And I would assume he's probably slightly more technically sound. I would think, even if it's not, he hasn't done all of those, I would say that a vast majority of those is what he's done. Amit says, I recently got into your course, Fans for Laptop, available everywhere. I have zero writing experience. Any suggestions or tips for it? It's a course that I made specifically so that, proper mainstream writers, like famous writers in cricket, have done that course, and people like you have done it. It's really built around your interests and your knowledge base. So I didn't want a course that only helped professional writers, and I didn't want a course that only helped amateur writers. I really wanted to help people who cared about writing and wanted to write, get better. And so that's what that course does. Look, there's a new movement within sort of art and the art community of like people, and music has had this for years, of kind of copying other people and doing your own twist on it. Find out who you like and why, and work out why you like them, and whether that's something you could do, because you can't really copy someone else's stuff. You can only do your version of it. And if you can push that to the nth degree, eventually you'll get to a point where you probably become your own. I was very lucky. My writing style was just a very natural thing and very different to everyone else's, but that doesn't come naturally to everyone else. But work out why you like the writers that you like is maybe the tip that I would give the most. Amit says, my last question. I'm visiting the MCG this year to see the Boxing Day test. Any things you could share to have a good time in the MCG and Melbourne in general? I mean, you got to get a meat pie. I'm assuming they still have. I mean, the last time they did, unless they've got rid of them since, I haven't been there since COVID. But people come around to you and you can buy a meat pie. So if you eat beef, I'm sure there's a vegetarian option as well. But famously, it's a beef pie. The other thing to eat in Australia, in Melbourne specifically, is a thing called dim sum, which was actually made for the MCG. It used to be sold out the back of people's cars. The guy who invented it, who was a Chinese restaurant owner, and he came up with like a takeaway that people could grab on the way out of the ground. And now it's eaten all over Australia. Those are my two favorite takeaways: meat pie and the dim sums. And Melbourne's the only place you can get steamed dim sums. The rest of the country is more about, well, the only place you can get them everywhere. The rest of the country is more about fried dim sums. Very different. I would taste both, see what you like. Soy sauce works quite well with both. Look, Melbourne is a place that you kind of, it's not, you can be in the center of Melbourne on like a Wednesday at like 7 p.m. and be like, where is everyone? It can be completely empty. Melbourne is a place where you have to find your district, right? And your district might be, it might be Williamstown, probably not Williamstown, but it might be Spotswood. It might be Hawthorne. It might be St Kilda, Brunswick, Fitzroy. Those are Brunswick, Fitzroy. Brunswick specifically was kind of my area the most. Carlton is obviously another one quite famous with tourists. You have to find your area and what works for you and what you like to do, and essentially you just get on a tram and you go to one of those places, and there will be bunches of bars and everything else. And the only other thing I would say about Melbourne is brunch. It's a brunch city. Is probably the greatest thing, and it's quite a late drinking city. Late sleeping and late drinking, so you can kind of always find a drink available in Melbourne or at random pub. And the sort of pubs that are open late at night can be quite interesting because of how varied they are, from pokies places where people are just putting coins in a machine beside you, all the way through to, especially in places like Brunswick and Fitzroy, really interesting sorts of late night bars that you can find. So yeah, that's what I would do. Anyway, I think that's me. That's done. Thank you for the super chats to Amit and Ekanth, and to all the other chats and everything that was in the group as well. We had a video go up about Keshav Maharaj on the main channel. Really worth going over and following up on that. And we've got, I've done one on hybrid pitches, which might be up tomorrow. There was a hybrid pitch fiasco in county cricket recently. And so having a little bit of a look at that, but more at hybrid pitches in general. But big thanks to everyone who does subscribe on both of our channels. We've gone over 100,000 people on the main channel, and I'm the face of the channel, but huge shout out to Muku, of course, and Shubu, who's put some work in, and people like AJ who don't even no longer work with us, who've been involved, and Cheyenne and Varun and CS and Estelle and all those people who've worked for us. Yeah, it's I think it's a victory for them. They're probably at times the channel's moved way quicker than we ever thought it would, and at other times it's moved way slower. But we've just tried to put the best content that we can up available. And the Keshav Maharaj video is a perfect example of that. Of I just think it's a fascinating story of Maharaj himself, but also of South Africa Test spin bowling. So go and check that out and check out all the other stuff. Please like and subscribe. Anywhere you can subscribe to something, whether it be on a podcast or on YouTube or, at goodareas.co, our website, wherever. All of those things help us make more content. And hopefully if you're here an hour and a half in to this podcast, you like content, and so that is the right way to go. Anyway, I'm off, and I probably will be back quite soon with a Joe Root podcast, but I think now I'm going to take a little bit of a break. But I am Jarrod Kimber. This is Good Areas, and we will see you again very, very soon. If you watch this channel, you'll love us on Main, where we do deep dives into the greatest cricket stories every week at Good Areas. How did Virat Kohli play that shot? What is so weird about Neil Wagner? And explaining the incredible misery of being a New Zealand opening batter. Visit our Good Areas site today. Want to show the world that you not only love cricket, but that you know the game deeply? Well, you need a Bodyline t-shirt. In fact, at Bodyline t-shirts, you can actually buy a t-shirt about Bodyline, but also tees inspired by the greatest players in our game. Head to Bodyline t-shirts today.